Before we start the video, big thank you for 200 subs. We did it, BB! Anyway, on with the video. I'm so sorry that happened. Growing up, there were only 3 consistent things in my life. Dragon Ball Z was always going to welcome me home, Crash Bandicoot had the illest games on the PlayStation 1, and Dawson should have ended up with what's-her-name. To my dismay, as I've grown older, only one of these consistencies remained, and much to my dismay, that consistency has nothing to do with blonde-haired aliens or box-smashing marsupials. Katie, no! He's not the right guy for you! But Kevin, what the heck happened to Crash? Why, I'm glad you asked me that question, perception of the audience. You see, Crash was imagined in the heyday of the mascot platformer. However, during the PS2 era, we knew which ones worked and which were a steaming pile of Bubsy.
What could possibly go wrong?
I hate you so much. But the issue that developers perceived at the time was that these games needed something to differentiate themselves, something unique to them. Now, Crash had a leg up before as it was a PlayStation exclusive and one of the first good 3D platformers. You ruin everything you touch, Bubsy! But this all changed as we left the PS1 behind and Naughty Dog abandoned Crash on the doorstep of Activision. You see, it was during the 6th generation of consoles, after we finally figured out that tricky third dimension, that now our platformers had to have a hook, literally in some cases. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't just Crash that was tacking things on, everyone was doing it. Sonic added shooter elements and treasure hunting, Mario went wet and wild, and Spyro turned into Elijah Wood.
I bet you all forgot about Frodo playing Smaug Jr., but I didn't. I'll never forget.
But innovation and change is the very nature of gaming. No one wants the same game over and over and over again, because that gets stale real fast. I'm talking about you, Dynasty Warriors. Learn some new tricks, you hack! And Slash. Now look, I'm not so old that I want time to stand still and games to always be the same. I'm not a tasteless hack. But there was a real issue during this time period when the idea of differentiation lost control of itself. This is best exemplified by Crash and Spyro. You see, while Crash began as a pixel-perfect platformer, subsequent games like Mind Over Mutant placed more emphasis on combat encounters, whereas in the OG Crash trilogy, combat is a part of the platforming. The levels themselves became more open, and yet the spaces were far less utilized. This too happened with Spyro, where now the emphasis was on story and combat, and less so on diverse levels and collectathon style gameplay. Now, I'm not saying these games are bad, but they aren't nearly as talked about as their original recipe counterparts. And after their release, both Crash and Spyro sat out the next generation of consoles, and were solely regulated to Skylander appearances. So I guess common opinion is saying they were bad. The Crash Bandicoot franchise was officially out of ideas. But just cause you've got nothing original to say doesn't mean you can't make a new game. Or at least that seems to be the modern game design ethos. So Activision, the current holders of the Crash license, decided to remake all the PlayStation 1 Crash games, or as we've established, the only good ones. Now, Activision knew this was Crash's big comeback, so who better to helm the ship than the company who made the least talked about Crash games? Though, real talk, I remember Nitro Kart actually being pretty slick, at least it was better than Tag Team Racing anyway. I'm not going to talk about the Crash remakes too much because I already did in another video, but if that's too long-winded, my experience with the Crash remake can best be summarized with the following clip.
I hate you so much!
Long story short, wasn't a fan. Now the thing is, I seem to be fairly alone in that line of thinking as these games made bank. So much so that the wells were primed for a wholly new Crash game after the well of nostalgia had been exhausted. Activision of course made the logical decision of not involving the developers of the Insane trilogy, instead opting to use Spyro Reignited devs Toys for Bob, whom I've also spoken about at length on this channel. Needless to say, I was excited for their take, and was eager to see if they could course correct my sour thoughts of Crash. But did they succeed? Or is Crash 4 just another quick cash grab? Will Gohan defeat Cell?
On the next Dragon Ball Z!
See, I brought it back to Dragon Ball Z, so now you can't say my format is disjointed and nonsensical. But I'm not the only one bringing back the 90s and early 2000s. Crash 4 It's About Time feels like a return to what made Crash an icon in the first place, but adds new ideas and mechanics that further refine the core that's there. Something its PS2 entries were lacking. Earlier I mentioned Super Mario Sunshine, a game which added to the Mario formula but retained its core identity. Whereas in Mind Over Mutant, without Crash's new abilities, the game doesn't really work, or becomes noticeably less enjoyable. Now at this point I know some of you may be thinking the only reason I like Crash 4 is pure nostalgia, and while it's true my enduring love for Crash got me to pick up a copy of the game, it's the game design that stopped me from putting it down. Crash 4 It's About Time feels like playing an epiphany moment, where a lot of the issues I had from the previous games were addressed, and I'm not just talking about the remake. The best way I can describe it is it's like in movies and stuff where someone has that light bulb idea moment. Crash 4 takes advantage of both new design ethos and the original intention of the series to make something truly amazing. But that's all just noise from some nasally dickhead's mouth, so let's talk about why Crash keeps me awake at night with its stupid sexy game design. Unlike Twinsanity, which opted for a more open world design, Crash 4 goes back to its tighter corridor-like levels. This allows each level of Crash 4 to have a singular focus in their design and makes for meticulously crafted experiences. In recent years, linearity has gotten a bad rap, but when it's used right, it can be super effective. Just because you know Splash Mountain ends with that big drop doesn't mean it's not a fun roller coaster. Now, I mentioned Splash Mountain as the levels of Crash 4 take major cues from theme park construction in what I'll now coin as roller coaster design. Because they're much more confined, the backgrounds and environments are much more dense and expressive, filled with things to gawk at. This even applies to the enemies, who are so lovingly modelled and animated they give off a mascot costume vibe, and it gives the level this feeling of being lived in. They also address an issue I had with the original Crash games. Now, I'm aware that Crash OG is very much limited by the hardware it's on, but the trilogy suffers from repeated assets a little too much for my taste, with the only way to break them up being introduced in Crash 3 Warped. Yes, you may have played through the Egyptian levels 4 times now, but what if you played through it at night? Crash 4 does indeed follow themes in its locales, but there's way more variety, like their sections of Disneyland, but with way less nightmare fuel. They may follow a theme, but there is way more variety within their narrow subject matter. Yes, you start on a beach level, but it then transitions to a spelunking and then an evil temple climb. There may be a desert style area, but it quickly becomes a Mad Max wet dream. Yes, there's a New Orleans Mardi Gras level, and it's the best one at me, but it quickly transitions into this cool swamp bayou setting that's just mwah, chef's kiss. It's not just the level design, but the mechanics of the game, which have also been further refined from its previous entries. Like the previous games, precise platforming is key, and for large stretches of the game, you're encouraged to learn the ins and outs of Crash's movement abilities. Even when the new masks that alter what Crash and Coco can do are used, it's restrained, used only for small portions of a level to bypass specific obstacles and to add variety. Kinda like another platforming genius. Let's take a look at the first special mask you get. You get this mask for the first time at the start of a level, and see there's a bridge that you can create, but there's boxes on either side. To deactivate the mask while on the bridge will cause you to fall to your death, but if you miss the timing on the boxes, you'll also fall to your death. So it's a nice little introductory to how you're supposed to use the mask throughout the rest of the game. Directly after, there are a series of platforms, one of which contains a 1-up and a platform, but neither are in the same phase shift. If you can jump on the box, you can get the 1-up, and then quickly activate the platform below so as to not waste it. Now, you could just safely ignore all this and not get the 1-up and just continue through the level as normal, but later on in that same level, if you know how to maximize Crash's existing moves with the new mask, you can find a hidden gem which can be used to unlock new costumes to reward your skills. But let's face it, all you need is the 90s as fuck ones.
Excellent!
Crash 4 added two rather interesting things into the game which I feel modernize it and make the game a bit more approachable for new players, without being irreversible for purists. This is the landing reticle and the optional classic mode. Classic mode gives Crash a finite amount of lives like in the original, and opting to turn it off means you have unlimited attempts at the level. The landing reticle tells you exactly where our orange friend will land and his general hitbox, a major issue that the Insane trilogy had across all three games and that Toys for a Bob also thought needed to be fixed. But you can turn these off whenever you want. This is just a little help for new players. The platforming challenge remains unchanged aside from the penalty of having to restart the level. Not only that, but the inverted levels, optional challenges, and tapes add even more challenge for Crash veterans who may feel the game is lacking in challenge. Don't get me wrong, Crash 4 is not a perfect game. It makes you replay sections of levels rather than creating entirely new ones for the new characters. Cortex sucks to play as, and it can spike ridiculously hard. But I feel it's a better addition to Crash's library than the PS2 entries in terms of consistency. I guess what I'm getting at is, even though people say they want new and innovative games, sometimes devs can throw the baby out with the bathwater. Fun fact, that actually happened to me as a child, and yes, it was done purposely. While we should always strive to improve, I think a lot of time this leads to strong foundations being gutted, and it's great to see more games return to form and do really well because of it. I mean, I've mentioned before how many indie games take the same basic structure of classic games that most AAA devs seem to ignore and make fantastic new IPs out of them. But a part of me still likes to see Crash be as good as I remember it. And look, I know a lot of people are not going to like these games because they nostalgia pander. And hey, that's fair. However, my counterpoint to you is that I may have grown up on Crash, but I didn't play the OG Doom and Zelda, yet I love their callback games. So ultimately, it can all be nostalgia, can it? But Breath of the Wild and Doom 2016 are a whole different kettle of fish, and I'll definitely get to them at some point. But what do you guys think? Is my opinion on Crash 4 overblown, or is there perhaps another return to form game I missed that has better exemplified my point? Let me know in the comments and give this video a like if you liked it, a dislike if you didn't, and maybe a sub if you're feeling naughty. Naughty dog, that is.